you pay for.
Margaret Thatcher was not only convinced, she was converted.
It was at a Chequers meeting that the community charge was born. They convinced me that we should abolish domestic rates and replace them with a community charge, levied at a flat rate on all resident adults.
The Prime Minister's relatively swift acceptance of a new policy was the first of many mistakes in the poll tax story. Despite its enthusiastic reception at Chequers, the birth of the poll tax was not cause for unanimous celebration. Absent from a meeting which decided the future of local government funding was a key minister, Chancellor Nigel Lawson.
Here we have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the minister in the government responsible for tax policy, effectively refusing to take part in the debate about a major tax reform. He didn't go to the Chequers meeting, he sent a deputy. He'll have sat at home that morning reading in the Sunday papers about what was going to go on at this meeting.
Enjoying a leisurely breakfast, Lawson was astounded to read an article in the Sunday Times entitled "Poll Tax Plan to Ease Rates." The Chancellor was horrified that so much was progressing in his absence. Lawson thought the new tax was a colossal error of judgment, a grotesque political blunder. He wrote a memorandum hoping to sink the new tax. In it he claimed the impact would be horrifying and concluded it would be unworkable and politically catastrophic. This was the beginning of a battle between Chancellor and Prime Minister that was to last for the next 5 years.
The Treasury is vital to the success of any tax. If the Treasury is opposed and the Chancellor of the Exchequer is opposed, then it's likely a tax change will fail. And indeed, the poll tax is unique in that it was a tax change, an enormous tax change, introduced despite the Treasury's vehement opposition.
In spite of the Chancellor's warnings, the poll tax began its steady progress through Parliament. On the 9th of January 1986, following exhaustive scrutiny, the first full Cabinet discussion about the new tax took place, led by Kenneth Baker.
The actual meeting of the Cabinet, which decided this, was a very dramatic meeting, because this was the meeting from which Michael Heseltine walked out and resigned over the issue of Westlands. So the first hour of this Cabinet was this frightfully tense meeting on Westlands, and Michael standing up from the table and saying, "This is a Cabinet in which I can no longer serve," and walked out and told the world's press about it. Then the Cabinet adjourned for a quarter of an hour to coffee and to collect its senses, because we weren't often involved in such great drama. And then we came back. And it fell to me, in a sort of rather aftermath of all of this, to make a presentation to the Cabinet on the community charge, which I did, and they accepted it.
Less than a year after the Chequers meeting, the poll tax was officially introduced to Parliament in the Green Paper, Paying for Local Government. It was an event that went largely unnoticed outside Westminster.
I think the press, and I include myself in that, failed. We knew that there were rumblings going on, but we were more noticing the open gunfire over Westland, over the future of Rover, over the bombing of Libya. There were some very big stories that year. Thatcher appeared to be in deep trouble. The focus was on that, rather than the almost subterranean rumbling of the preparation of a lot of the details of what turned into the poll tax. So I think our eye was off the ball.
Much to Thatcher's delight, the poll tax continued its steady, largely unpublicised progress. The 1987 general election produced a Tory landslide that was seen by many as a mandate for her new tax.
Mrs. Thatcher was phenomenally powerful in the way that Tony Blair has been in recent years, and when the opposition was very weak. Consequently, the Prime Minister very often got her own way, and she was, as far as the Conservative Party was concerned, a miracle worker.
Gaining in confidence, the Prime Minister made a now famous reference to the poll tax as the flagship of the Thatcher fleet.
It was typical of her that she would associate herself so closely with an issue of this kind because she believed it was right. she was convinced that if she could only get across to people that it was a fairer system, that it was addressing an injustice, then they would come round to support it. And so she felt that it needed her personal authority in order to get that message across.
Thatcher's flagship speech, with its vague reference back to her victory in the Falklands, was a big mistake, one that would return to haunt her, because from now on she personally was linked to the poll tax. It had become Thatcher's poll tax. And within months the Prime Minister made another error of judgment when she backed a plan for the more rapid introduction of the new tax. In the autumn of 1987, the big issue at stake was how the new charge should be introduced. Until then, the plan had been to phase it in alongside an element of the old rate system. This was known as dual running. Many, especially the originators of the idea, believed that this was the only possible way to ease the introduction of such a huge tax change. One of the key players in the poll tax story was Nicholas Ridley, who had taken over from Kenneth Baker as Environment Secretary. Ridley had his own ideas about how the new tax should be introduced, and all he had to do was to persuade his leader.
Nick Ridley's job was to prepare the bill and take the bill through the House of Commons, and he became convinced during that year that dual running was not necessary. He believed that the community charge was such a good thing that you had to have it all at once.
Ridley had to find a way to convince Thatcher, and he chose the 1987 Tory party conference as the venue to implement his new plan.
And at every single one that I have been
At that conference, Jerry Malone, a Scottish MP who had recently lost his seat, made a speech urging a more rapid launch for the new tax.
What's going on here is that a leading member of the party is standing in front of the party faithful, the people who keep the Prime Minister and other members of the government in the position that they're in. And Jerry Malone is saying to the party, why don't we do this thing we all want to do, but do it quicker, do it sooner?
Can we have it introduced in one go and not over 3 or 4 years?
And of course they react in this almost ecstatic way, and as far as the Prime Minister's concerned, all she was being asked to do was to do something she was already completely convinced of quicker.
Away from the conference, Thatcher's decision to abandon any idea of easing in her new tax met with grave concern among the originators of the idea.